Your right hand comes off?
Hello everyone, happy Halloween! This year I'm not really doing a big, elaborate, spooky game review, but instead a video involving one of my favorite games of all time that just so happens to be horror related. Resident Evil 4. Specifically, I want to discuss a lot of the larger and smaller details that makes this game really special to me, and how the remake either succeeds or fails to do the same. The timing of this video may seem a little late. The remake is almost 2 years old at this point, and plenty of people have praised the game as the shining example of a great remake, while others have nitpicked the hell out of it, with a lot of negativity falling on some of the voice acting as well as some missing content. I want to focus on a different area of critique though, and if anything, it feels a little better talking about it now that the discourse isn't as heated. Sure, I could go on about various things, like my annoyance that enemies ignore headshots most of the time, limiting you to a parry-focused playstyle of gameplay. I have to keep that in mind. What? Okay, so sometimes they could just no-sell headshots, that's chill. My own gripes with some of the vocal performances.
You can't save her. You can't save anyone.
Or how disappointed I am that memorable moments from the original, like the lava room, the statue chase, and all the QuickTime event cutscenes are missing entirely. But really I want to focus on something that I think most people often overlook when comparing the two games: the direction. Specifically, the direction and execution of scenes and story progression that leave a notable impact on the player and creates compelling characters and moments. The first big example I want to show off is the village gauntlet towards the start of the game. When it comes to the gameplay section itself, I think the remake actually does a great job of replicating the same feeling that the original gave. It's early on in the game, you're a new player, you're still getting the hang of the game's controls, the controls of a brand new Resident Evil that's unlike anything that came before. Having to suddenly deal with a seemingly endless onslaught of enemies in an area you just walked into is terrifying, challenging, and most of all, exhilarating. With this in mind, I want to analyze the cutscenes, the one in the middle of the gauntlet, and the one after it's ended. The first cutscene triggers when Leon runs into this house to try to buy some time away from the horde of villagers. This scene is done extremely well in the original, with the cinematography and cuts perfectly paced with Leon being panicked and overwhelmed. The camera quickly zooms out the window as he sees the aggressive villagers plotting, turns to show even more are coming, and then quickly turns back again and boom, close-up of a chainsaw. The first time you see the chainsaw enemy at all. Leon says, "Oh hell no," and blocks the door, but then you get this great swinging camera shot of a ladder violently breaking the upstairs window. This scene makes it abundantly clear this is not a safe haven. These aren't dumb zombies, these are intelligent threats capable of planning. They've got frickin' chainsaws and they're coming right now. On paper, the remake does this scene exactly the same, but if you watch them side by side, you see that the execution is very different. As Leon peers out the window, there isn't this frantic looking back and forth, seeing the villagers plot, and then being caught off guard by a sudden chainsaw right in your face. It just does this slow, leisurely zoom. And then you get this subdued static shot of the ladder breaking the window above. It just doesn't hit the same. The cutscene at the end of this section is also very important, as it comes right after what is the first big hurdle of the game. This endurance round is basically the filter that makes sure you have a decent understanding on how to play. It's not uncommon to die here during a first playthrough, so seeing all the villagers wander off after almost dying to them is a huge relief. Then you get this sick bird's eye view of the area you were just fighting for your life in, and then that iconic title drop that basically says, yeah, all that you had to go through just now, running around, futilely seeking shelter, fighting for your life, you're just getting started, pal. My complaints for how the remake does this scene isn't as severe, but it's still notable in my opinion. Really, I think the scene just lingers on the villagers leaving for far too long. There's a lot of prolonged shots here that just overstay their welcome. I think the surprise of you being inches away from death to your attackers suddenly leaving you all alone doesn't hit quite as well when it isn't that sudden. In the original, it takes about 30 seconds from the villagers first hearing the bell to Leon being alone in the empty village, where in the remake it takes almost a full minute. The final bit is different here too, where they opt away from the awesome aerial shot of the original, and instead the camera pulls back to reveal the cop burning. I don't think this is inherently a bad image to title drop on, but I like the feeling portrayed in the GameCube game more. We already saw them burn this guy, so the image isn't too striking. Ironically, I actually have the opposite issue where Leon has his first introductions to Louis while they're tied up together. After a lot of tense moments, this feels like the first part of the game where you actually have a chance to take a breath, while the two characters take their times introducing themselves to one another.
Me llamo Luis Serra. I used to be a cop in Madrid.
You get to focus on meeting this new character, who happens to be one of the only allies Leon has during this entire ordeal. In the remake, they changed this by having the two of them in a standing position, with a pulley system that Leon keeps yanking as an ignored Luis tries to talk to him. This feels a little too hectic and distracting as we're trying to properly meet this new character. The only real back and forth we get between the two, before they're split up again, is the pulling of the chain. Speaking of characters, I want to go over the villains. Chief Mendez isn't too different between the two games, though I do greatly miss the amazing scene in the original where we see him Terminator jump out of the window after Ada. It shows that not only is this guy built like a brick house, but he can also really move if he needs to. For whatever reason, he decides to just slowly walk away instead in the remake, a disappointing omission of a really cool moment. Salazar is a character who truly develops himself as a villain via his walkie-talkie chats with Leon. After hacking into your radio, every time you get a call, you can expect a taunting and amusing conversation with the little creep.
Why don't you do us all a favor and leave before the audience gets pissed off?
Your biggest scene is over.
The remake has a clever idea where instead of talking to Leon via radio, Salazar instead makes use of his antique speaker system in the many rooms of his castle. The only problem with this, however, is that it means the iconic back and forths between the two no longer exist. You might think, hey, well, at least that means there's an opportunity here to add more Hunnigan into the game, right? Well, you would be right, except that Leon's radio gets disrupted anyway, so he still loses contact with Hunnigan without adding anyone new to his phone book. Going back to that elaborate speaker system Salazar uses, there's something similar in the original when Leon falls through his trap door towards the spike pit, and then Salazar listens in to hear what he calls the satisfying sound of one's impalement.
Where's the satisfying sound of one's impalement?
In response, Leon shoots the speaker, hitting Salazar's eardrum with sharp feedback and breaking that final straw, which leads him to sick his OP right-hand man after the special agent. It's such a satisfying moment that not only you're able to avoid his trap, but you even get to rub it in his face with some hearing damage, denting the little guy's massive ego. When I recognized the speaker system in the remake, I got really excited. I thought, yo, this is sick. They're letting us do what Leon did in that cutscene. But here, instead of having a tantrum, shooting the speaker system merely results in Salazar snickering? That's a real letdown. Another character that's negatively affected from the missing radio scenes is the big bad himself, Osmond Sadler. After defeating Salazar and moving on to the final third of the game, Sadler takes over as Leon's dedicated walkie-talkie buddy, all along the way taunting and belittling and keeping you nice and hyped to finally catch up and beat the crap out of him, something that's severely missed in the remake. A great example of this is on the island when Leon's long-awaited backup in the form of helicopter pilot Mike helps you deal with the army of armed ganados. That is until he's shot down in a blaze of glory, Sadler directly being involved. Then he has the gall to phone Leon and tell him that he was just swatting a bothersome fly. What an asshole. But the missing radio calls aren't the only lack of Sadler here. Resident Evil 4 has three main overarching sections: the village, the castle, and the island. In the original game, Sadler makes at least one big appearance in each of these sections. In fact, Leon only really encounters him once each in the village and castle. But they're very notable moments that greatly help establish him as the game's main villain. In the village, you get your introduction to Sadler, learning who the mysterious figure behind all of this is, and that he has plans for literal world domination. In the remake, I guess they've decided to double down on the mysterious figure part because he doesn't ever meet up with Leon Leon in the village. The only cutscene you see with him are these dream segments that allude to him infecting Leon with the Plaga, though we do also blatantly see the chief administering it himself. So we have no Sadler radio talk, no Sadler introduction to Leon in the village, and no personal interactions with Sadler whatsoever up until the 11th hour of the game. All he really is at this point is the role he's been given, the final boss of the game. No real build-up or impactful presence to really make him anything more than that. But there is one key moment that can save this, one pivotal scene that takes Sadler from merely being a generic big bad to really making our mission to destroy him personal. It's when that son of a bitch kills Luis. This is such an important turning point in the game where we lose the one in-person ally that's had our back since we got to this hellish place. This is that extra motivation that would really inspire us to hate Remake Sadler. But in the remake, Luis isn't killed by Sadler. Instead, Krauser is the one to put our Spanish friend down. At first I thought this was kind of an interesting change, but in the grand scheme of things, Remake Sadler really needed this moment in lieu of all the other absent interactions in the game. Leon and Krauser already have an interesting enough relationship, and he also has direct involvement with kidnapping Ashley. He really didn't need to be the one to kill Luis. Speaking of Krauser, there's one particular moment with him that I want to bring up. It's during the final portion of his boss fight where his arm transforms into what looks like Soul Edge from the Soul Calibur series, revealing to Leon that he's truly sacrificed his humanity to obtain what he feels is ultimate power.
Witness the power!
Oh, we're witnessing it all right. When I think of Krauser, I think of this line. In the remake, Krauser has his arm transformation scene, but he doesn't say his iconic "witness the power" line. He simply does his high school bully shtick and calls Leon a rookie again. I was very disappointed to find this line missing during my first playthrough of the remake, but I didn't realize that things would somehow get worse. Immediately after that scene, Leon falls into some dark ruins, and it's during this section, in the dark, during gameplay, that Krauser suddenly and inexplicably shouts, "How? How am I to witness your power, Krauser? I can't see you. You're not showing it to me at this particular moment." Why? It's one thing to have the line missing, but to take it away from the iconic scene just to shove it into a random other gameplay segment as if it's just a throwaway line is so much worse. If you want things to be different, okay, fine, but you have to commit to it, because doing it in this weird half and half way just doesn't work. The worst part is they actually had the opportunity here to have their cake and eat it too, in a way that really would have worked. As it turns out, Remake Krauser doesn't just have the one fleshy parasite arm. By the time you've reached the final segment of his boss fight, his other arm is transformed as well. Notice I say has. That's because we don't see it happen. This second nightmare limb could have been utilized in such a way that they could have first subverted our expectations by leaving the "witness the power" line out of the first transformation scene, making us believe that it must have been removed, only to then surprise us during the final battle with the new addition of Krauser's other arm transforming, where he then says the line. You could have had it all, RE4 Remake. You could have done something different and rewarded the diehard players who remember every little thing about the original. It would have been perfect. Okay, I know a lot of people are probably seeing this as just a negative bashing of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and maybe just see me as this old miser who doesn't like any kind of change, but it really isn't. I enjoyed RE4 Remake. It's just that the original RE4 is such a beloved game for me, and is such a special video game experience, that I feel this hyper-awareness of things that worked so well in the original missing the mark, whether by a lot or just a little in the remake. In fact, I'd like to end this video by actually listing off some of the new additions that I did genuinely appreciate. Having the option to either pause and swap in the menu or quick swap during gameplay. I have to give Capcom major kudos for this. They could have easily just had the quick swap be mandatory, as a lot of modern games tend to do, or they could have just had the case be the only means to swap like in the original. I really like that they gave us the option to do both. Something that I certainly took full advantage of. I like that the village area of the game's been greatly expanded, particularly in the lake section. They give you so much more to do here that the only drawback in retrospect is that it sort of leads you to expect the castle and island areas to be expanded as well, only to find out that they're about the same length as they were in the original. I wonder if they would have did more with more time. Speaking of the lake, the Del Lago boss fight in the remake is a perfect one-to-one recreation of the one in the GameCube game. This may be seen as a positive or a negative thing depending on your perspective, but as someone who's pretty much mastered the original while also struggling to learn some of the mechanics in the remake, this came as a delightful surprise for me. Now, if only they had the QTE at the end where Leon has to cut the rope before he's dragged down into the fishy abyss. I like that the game includes more bits of lore spread throughout that gives us some extra background info on characters like Chief Mendez, Salazar, and even Luis, who in this version turns out to have a personal connection to the village itself. Speaking of Luis, we do get more time with him in this game as well, allowing him to join in and help us during the minecart ride of doom. We get a little of Sadler's family background as well, the most shocking revelation probably being that the patriarch of the entire Sadler lineage is... It all begins here. Adam Sandler? I mean... I like that Ashley is actually a human being in this game, or at least she acts a lot more like one, rather than the awkward damsel in distress that she is in the original. I like that the shooting gallery has been greatly expanded and includes a lot of actual practical rewards via a gacha system, even though I kinda suck at it in this game compared to the original. I like that the final boss fight with Sadler has been made bigger and more epic than it ever was before. The first time you reach him in the original, it might feel exciting, but he's such a pushover during subsequent attempts, it loses its luster pretty quickly. I really like the Sadler-induced hallucination scenes, which, whether intentional or not, gives off shades of the Resident Evil 4 Hookman demo, which featured a beta version of RE4, which had a much more supernatural and psychological horror focus. I like that the Mercenaries mode adds more characters, all with unique abilities, being able to play with Luis in particular being super cool. And they even make the enemies here actually react to headshots, unlike during the main campaign, so more than ever it feels like I'm allowed to use my preferred playstyle. I like Resident Evil 4 Remake, but I don't like it nearly as much as this, for a lot more reasons than I've just talked about. And that's okay, but I had to get at least some of that off my chest. Anyway, that's about everything I have to say for now. I hope you all have a very happy Halloween. Until next time.